Thank you all for joining us tonight. For any visitors, we'll be continuing our study of the Old Testament that we began many months ago. Tonight we're gonna talk about the return from exile. It seems fitting that I would be sort of introducing this topic because it seems like we just returned from exile ourselves a couple weeks ago. We were exiled to our home, thanks to my lovely wife, but she decided to keep her COVID to herself. She didn't share it with Cadence and I, so we're thankful for that. But in all seriousness, thank you all. The church really helped us get through a difficult time. A lot of people reached out with texts, with phone calls, with food, with prayers, and it ended up working out well. So we thank you very much for all your support. So tonight we're going to talk about Cyrus's edict. It's just a few short verses that Silas just read, but it's a pretty important event in the Bible. A lot happens here. So King Cyrus, he with this edict, he sets the Jewish exiles that are in Babylon. He sets them free. He tells them to go to Jerusalem, go back to their home, rebuild their house of their God. And even encourages the ones who are staying to contribute to this effort, to contribute monetarily to this effort. His edict brings an end to the 70 years of captivity of the Jews. It initiated the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and we'll see tonight that it fulfilled a number of prophecies in the Old Testament. So I won't reread this. We'll read different sections of this later, but as we're going through this, but just to kind of give a brief background, a mile-high view summary of what's going on previous to this. So we've been studying the Old Testament, King David. Following David, there was just a succession of kings that would lead Judah, lead Israel in and out of idolatry. So we'd have some good kings and then some bad kings, and the bad kings really created some idol problems with the Israelites, and this really made God mad. This was something he had specifically warned them about with Moses' law, and really warned them that they would be punished severely for following idols. But that's what they did. So God gave them the punishment that he promised. We saw Israel was conquered by Assyria, taken away into captivity, the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and then not even a generation later, it seems like, Judah is then conquered by Babylonia. Jerusalem and the temple are just totally leveled, crushed to the dirt. And the people of Jerusalem are carried away to Babylon to be captives. And God told them that this captivity would last 70 years. Meanwhile, as we fast forward a few decades into this captivity, near the end of this 70 years, there's this country called Persia that's slowly beginning to rise as this world power in the area. And this is due to this King Cyrus, also known as Cyrus the Great, who's bringing them up. Look at a map here. So around 559, Cyrus takes the throne in Persia, and you can see this small area that he was ruler of. Well, within less than 10 years, he conquers Media, which is huge. And then shortly thereafter, he conquers Lydia. And then he sets his sights on Babylonia. And he conquers Babylon in 539. So just 20 years into his reign, he captures Babylon. And that leads us to the first year of his reign over Babylon, is where he gives his edict that we just read about in Israel. So Cyrus's edict, it's got three main elements, and we'll cover those real quickly. The first element of this edict is a purpose. He issues a purpose to this proclamation. He says, the Lord God of heaven has charged him to build a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. He says, and if that's not specific enough, so he wants them to build a house for God. And if that's not specific enough, he then says, rebuild the house of the Lord. So he's talking about the temple that was in Jerusalem that was destroyed. He wants it to be rebuilt. And that's the purpose of his edict. Notice he credits the Lord here with this, the Lord, the God of heaven, with giving him all the kingdoms of the earth. He gives God credit for his own power. But you'll see if you read this a little bit closer, you'll see that later he refers to his God, talking about the people, the Israelites, talking about their God, and the God of Israel in Jerusalem. So he sees God as their God, not necessarily his God, but it's their God. These Jews, it's their God. And it's this God of Jerusalem. That's where he lives. So we'll see later that he's not really a follower of God. The next element is the people. He says, whoever is among all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So he says he wants this temple rebuilt. Who's going to do it? Well, here it is. Whoever is among all his people, talking about the Jews. He leaves it pretty open. I mean, this word whoever is pretty open. He's not saying all the Jews, these exiles, you have to go build this. Basically, it's if you want to go do it, go do it. And it's whoever is among you. So it's not just, doesn't even have to be specifically the Jews. Even people who living among them who consider themselves part of that group, they can join them. So if they've married into other people of other nations who are also in exile, their family can go with them, or their servants. We see that later on. You'll see that if you read through the chapter, you see that it was a number of servants. Quite a large number of servants actually went with them as well, who weren't necessarily Jewish or even from Jerusalem. So he leaves it open. You'll find out later on as you read that a large number do go, but not everybody goes. And it's not surprising that some people would stay behind. I mean, they've been in Babylon for 70 years. For a lot of these people, this is the only home they've ever known. Many of them become successful. They have wealth, they have businesses, they're doing well in Babylon, and they don't necessarily want to go back. And then the third element is provision. So the temple needs to be rebuilt. These people need to travel back. It's a great distance to go back. There needs to be a way to make that happen. It's going to cost money. It's going to require supplies, valuables. So he says, let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. So here Cyrus makes provision for how this is going to happen. He says for the people, the Jews who are staying behind, give your valuables, give your silver, your gold, give animals. These people are going to need these things to survive, for one, and then they're also going to be free will offerings for the house of God. So the temple itself is going to need offerings as well that you need to contribute to if you're staying behind. So this if you think back to our earlier studies, back in the Exodus, and this, we see a parallel here of when Moses led the Jews out of Egypt, and the Egyptians, God made provision for the Jews by having the Egyptians actually give their own goods, their own valuables to the Jews before they left. And those valuables ended up being the gold and the silver that they gave them, and the material, the fabrics that they gave them, the valuable fabrics they gave them, ended up being what decorated the temple, what was used to decorate the temple, or the tabernacle, sorry. So we have a parallel here where, again, we see, once again, the temple needs to be built, and God provides provision for that to happen. So just what you'd expect from a good leader of the biggest nation, the biggest empire in the world at this time, he provides very clear direction, very simple but concise instructions. He tells them what needs to be done, who's going to do it, and how to make it happen. So who exactly is this Cyrus? He's actually mentioned 20 different times in the Bible. Most of the mentions of him in the Bible that occur during his rule really don't tell us much of anything about him. You have the edict that we just read, and then you have several places in Ezra, Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Daniel, where he's mentioned as the King Cyrus, king of Persia. So we know that much about him. But surprisingly, it's actually Isaiah who tells us the most about Cyrus. And I say it's surprising because Isaiah actually prophesied about Cyrus 150 to 200 years before he ever took control of Persia. So it's interesting that that's where we get most of our information about him from the Bible. In Isaiah 44:28, Isaiah says, "Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall fulfill all my promise, all my purpose." And then in 45, verse 1, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings." And then down in verse 13, "I have stirred him up in righteousness. I will make all his ways level." So God tells us through Isaiah that Cyrus is a shepherd. He's anointed to perform God's purpose. He's been stirred up in righteousness. God is going to lead Cyrus by the hand to do God's purpose. And then we see in further down, chapter 45, verses 4 and 5, something a little surprising. After hearing all this, he says, "For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me." So this man who is going to rise up as a ruler, he's going to be God's shepherd. He's going to be God's anointed. He's not going to know God, is what Isaiah tells us here. Typically, when you read the Bible and you see somebody described in the Bible as a shepherd or as anointed, you think of people like King David. You think of people like Moses. But here we've got a man who doesn't even know God. And God has anointed him and made him as a shepherd to do his purpose. So Isaiah also tells us some things about what Cyrus is going to do. Speaking of Cyrus, he says, "Saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built, and of the temple your foundation shall be laid." And then he goes on to say, "He shall build my city and set my exiles free, not for price or reward." So Isaiah tells us, God tells us through Isaiah, that Cyrus is going to commission the temple to be rebuilt, to commission Jerusalem to be rebuilt. And he's going to set the exiles free. And on top of all that, he's not going to expect anything in return. He's not doing it for money. He's not doing it for reward. He's just doing it for what we read here, for God's purposes. And then a couple more prophecies that are pretty interesting. So in Isaiah 44:27, now this one is speaking generally of God's power, but it precedes the verse where he actually names Cyrus. So you see up there earlier, verse 28, that's the first mention of Cyrus that Isaiah gives us. Well, the verse before, God says, "Who says of the deep, be dry, I will dry up your rivers." Story has it, legend has it, not legend, but different accounts of Cyrus's capture of Babylon actually say that what his army did is they went upriver on the Euphrates River and diverted that river. The river actually ran into Babylon, ran under the city walls. Well, they diverted it, so the water level goes down, and they are actually able to just walk right in under the walls in the dry riverbed. Well, it wasn't dry. It says the water was thigh deep on them. So then in chapter 45, verse 1, he talking again about Cyrus. He says, to open doors, God is going to open doors before him that gates may not be closed. So again, we see this reference that may be talking about that. This gate just be opening. The wall is open. They were able to just walk right into Babylon without any fight at all. So we also have some historical references that tell us some information about Cyrus. He was a pretty famous ruler back then. So there are several Greek historians who wrote about Cyrus, who tell about his time as ruler, and they all wrote very favorably about him. And this is surprising because Greeks and Persians were just bitter enemies. I mean, you guys saw the movie 300. These are the same groups of people. They hated each other. But one of those historians, talking about Cyrus, he says he blessed the land with peace. He incurred no anger of the gods because he was wise. Another one said that, talking about the Persians, they actually referenced Cyrus as their father, or as a father to them. Another historian named Herodotus, he wrote about his childhood, and this is considered to be legend. I don't know how true this is, but essentially he tells the story of Cyrus's grandfather, who was the king of Media at the time that Cyrus was a baby. And he has this dream that baby Cyrus is going to grow up and kill him and take his power. So he orders for Cyrus to be slain, as this baby Cyrus to be slain. And the legend goes that the king's chief advisor, then instead of having the baby slain, he takes him and hides him with the shepherd and his wife to keep him safe until he can get older. Well, and then around the time that he's 10 years old, the king finds about him, that he's still alive, and gets his attention, and then he decides has a change of heart because he sees all these great characteristics that he's displaying, even though he's just 10 years old. So he decides to let him live. And then, of course, true history, we know that then later on he did actually grow up and defeat his grandfather and take over Media. But one thing that's interesting about that is so he was given to a shepherd to hide. And remember earlier, Isaiah talks about Cyrus being a shepherd, God's shepherd. So there could be referring to that. Again, this is just legend, so we don't know if this is true. But it's interesting that shepherd reference could be real, could be what's the word I'm looking for? Figurative or literal, or it could be both. And then we also have the Cyrus cylinder. This is an artifact that was found in Babylon around 1879 in the ruins. It's essentially a clay cylinder with this inscription written all over it, which turns out is basically Persian propaganda, talking about Cyrus's capture of Babylon. It's really written in two sections. The first part talks about his victories, and then the second part talks about the reforms that he instituted once he took over. One of the things that it reveals is he credits these pagan gods Marduk, Bel, and Nebo for giving him this power and for all of his success, not the God of Israel as he did in his decree. And this doesn't ever actually specifically name the Israelites, the Jews. He doesn't ever talk about him letting them go. But it does talk about his policies in general. It talks about how he allowed these various deported people who'd been captured, were in captivity, to return to their homelands. Talks about permitting them to return their gods to the sanctuaries and rebuild destroyed temples. He allowed these people to get rid of these gods that the Babylonian kings had imposed on them and forced them to worship. And essentially it established religious freedom for all the people that were under his rule. So again, as I said, this doesn't specifically name the Jews or the Israelites, but it really falls in line with the edict that we read in the Bible. Before this was found, a lot of biblical skeptics, critics, said that as they read Cyrus's edict in Ezra, they said there's no way that happened. Kings didn't do that back then. What kings did back then, as we saw with Assyria, with Babylon, when they captured a people, they put their foot on their throats. They took them away. They moved them to a different land. They took away their gods. They made them worship their gods instead. If they had, say, statues, idols that they worshiped, they would carry those off, put them in their palaces, just so they could show anybody who was visiting, this is that God that so-and-so worshipped. I've defeated him. Here it is. He's not as powerful as me or my God. Well, now we know that this actually was Cyrus's policy. It falls right in line with what the book of Ezra tells us he did. So here we have a case of archaeology supporting what's in the Bible. So going back to Ezra 1, verse 1, Notice here he says that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be filled. So this edict that Cyrus gave, it fulfills some prophecy that Jeremiah gave. So let's walk through some of the prophecies that Jeremiah gave regarding Cyrus, or regarding this, that are fulfilled in this edict. Jeremiah 29, verse 10 says, "For thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise, and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord. And I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord. And I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile." So here, this prophecy tells us that there's going to be 70 years of exile, and then God's going to gather the exiles and bring them back to their home, and he would even restore their fortunes. In Cyrus's edict, verses 3, 4, and 6, we see, he says, "Whoever is among you, let him go up to Jerusalem." So he's setting them free. He's letting them go back home. Then he says, for them to be assisted with silver, gold, with goods and beasts. He's providing them their fortunes back. And then it's in verse 6, you see it says, "And then all who are about them aided them." So they actually did do what Cyrus told them. The people who stayed behind, they gave them the gold, the silver, these goods, the beasts, the wares that needed to be offered for them to make this journey. We see another prophecy in Jeremiah 27, verses 21 and 22. "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that are left in the house of the Lord. In the house of the king, Judah, and in Jerusalem, they shall be carried to Babylon, and remain there until the day when I visit them, declares the Lord. Then I will bring them back and restore them to this place." So these temple vessels that were in the temple in Jerusalem, they're going to be carried away. They're going to be taken to Babylon. But God promises he will bring them back, and he will restore them into the temple. Cyrus's edict tells them to do just that. He also, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So in verse 7 of Ezra 1, it says, "Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and placed in the house of his gods. Cyrus, king of Persia, brought these out in the charge of Mithridath." Skip down to verse 11. "All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem." So not only did Cyrus tell people to give towards this effort, but then he also goes into his vault, his newly acquired vault or palace or storage room or whatever that they were kept. Nebuchadnezzar had taken all these vessels and stored them, and Cyrus goes and brings them out. And the verses we skip there, it gives an accounting of what all it was, a number of each different type of vessel. And then he gives them back to the people that they belong to. How unusual is that, even by today's standards, for a government to actually give back taxes, for lack of a better word, that they've taken from people? It doesn't happen very often. And then the next prophecy is in Jeremiah 30, verse 18. "Thus says the Lord, behold, I will restore the fortunes of the tents of Jacob, and have compassion on his dwellings. The city shall be rebuilt on its mound, and the palace shall stand where it used to be." Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt in the exact same location. The palace, which it's referring to the temple, to God's palace, God's home, would be rebuilt in the same location too. And we see in Cyrus's edict, he says, "Build them a house at Jerusalem. Go up to Jerusalem, rebuild the house of the Lord." They're going to put it right back in the same place. He charges them to rebuild the temple that has been destroyed. And it's inferred here that, although he didn't specifically say go rebuild Jerusalem, for them to rebuild the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, they would have to rebuild at least a portion of that city as well for them to live in, and then for people to come and worship in that temple. So why did God select Cyrus? Why did he pick this polytheistic, pagan worshiper to go release his exiled Israelites, his chosen people? Why did he pick this ungodly man to do his work? The answer Isaiah gave us 150 to 200 years before Cyrus was even around, when he talked about Cyrus, said, "For Jacob my servant's sake and Israel my elect, I have even called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to its setting that there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other." God did this so that all the world would know that he is God. He is the only God, and there is no God like him. When he talks about this phrase, from the rising of the sun to its setting, that has both two meanings. It has a geographical meaning. It's talking about from the east all the way to the west. And then it has a time meaning as well, from the morning to night, for all time. So everyone across the whole world, from all time, that they will know that I am the Lord. I am the only God. So it's interesting. This story is very interesting in that we see here God using a pagan god, somebody whose religious policies were based on this idea of, I'll let you worship however you want to worship. One part of the reason for that was so that they'll be less likely to revolt against him. But the other part of it was so that he would make their gods happy, and that their gods would then ask for blessings to his gods to bless him. So his theory was, the more gods that are happy with me, the better, the more success I'm going to have. But by God using Cyrus, this pagan worshiper, to do his will, he proved that he's not just the God of Israel. He's not just the God of Jerusalem. He's not just the God of this group of Jewish exiles who have been captured and are stuck here in Babylonia. He is the God over the entire earth and over all people, and there is no other Lord. So let's talk about what specific traits are demonstrated here that demonstrate that there is no other God. He demonstrated that he is faithful. God is faithful like no other God is. God keeps his promises. He promised the exiles he would return them after 70 years, and that the temple would be rebuilt. And he made good on those promises. He also, by keeping these promises, he also restored their faith that God would still keep the Davidic covenant that he had with them. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, he says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations." God's faithfulness doesn't end with time. It goes on for 1,000 generations. But it is contingent. There is a clause there. With those who love him and keep his commandments. He is faithful to those who love him and keep his commandments. And we see all that over and over again with the Old Testament history. When the Israelites would not keep his commandments, that's when they were punished. But when they did, that's when he was faithful to keep his promises. Next, God showed us that he knows all. He knows everything that's going to happen for all eternity. He knew the Jews would return to idolatry and that he would have to punish them with 70 years of captivity. But he also knew that this punishment would bring about a change in them, that they would come back to him. They would turn away from their idols and they would turn towards God and begin to worship him again. So he knew that he needed to ensure a way to release them out of captivity. And he knew that Cyrus would be the perfect instrument to make this happen. Long before Cyrus was even born, he knew that. Isaiah 44, verses 7 and 8 says, "And who can proclaim as I do? Then let them declare it and set it in order for me. Since I appointed the ancient people and the things that are coming and shall come, let them know these to them. Do not fear nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one. Is there anyone else who can predict the future every time and be correct every time? Only our God, only one God, has accurately declared all the things that are going to happen. And then lastly, we see that God is sovereign. There is no other God that is sovereign, only one God. All authority on earth is given by God, even when it's given to someone who doesn't follow him. God paved the way for Cyrus and his religious policies to be in a position of power at the time he needed him to be able to conquer Babylon. He stirred up the spirit of Cyrus to carry out his will and free the exiles after 70 years after their captivity began. He even led Cyrus to provide the resources they needed to go back home and rebuild the temple. Isaiah 45:12 says, this is God speaking through Isaiah, I have made the earth and created man on it. My hands, stretched out the heavens, and all their host I have commanded. Only one God created man. Only one God created earth. And only one God has supreme power and authority over all of man and earth and the heavens. And that is the God who put Cyrus in power. That's the God we spoke about tonight. This concludes my study for the evening. I hope it's been as beneficial to you as it was for me. We always want to offer a chance an invitation to be part of this one and only sovereign God's church. If you don't know God, if you want to know the faithful God, the only all-knowing God and the only sovereign God, this would be the time to come up as we sing the song that's been selected. Or if you're having problems and your struggles and you want the prayers of the church, please come up as well.